Hello and welcome to episode number 39 of the Red Zone podcast series, where I invite IT security innovators, leading entrepreneurial minds, and wildly inspiring individuals to share their stories and offer tips to help you achieve your top success. I'm your host, Bill Murphy, and in today's show, I'm thrilled, excited, and pumped to bring to you my interview with Michelle Guillain, psychology researcher, founder of the Institute for Applied Positive Research, former CBS News anchor, and author of the best-selling book, Broadcasting Happiness. Well, Michelle, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I am fascinated to learn a little bit more about your background. You've just come out with this wonderful book, Broadcasting Happiness, and I want to get into that. But I also I was reading your bio a little bit, and I see that you have an engineering background. I'd love to hear about how you developed that interest and what led you to where you are right now. If you could just give us a little bit of a story of how you got started and what led you down this path.
Yeah, it's so funny because people, when they hear that I was originally a computer engineer, and then I became a national news anchor for CBS, and then I ended up as a positive psychology researcher and now speaker at companies, they're like, what is going on here? So they say, cats have 9 lives. I guess maybe I'm on my way. But what happened was that I always wanted to do work that was a calling that I felt served the world. And so in technology, I definitely felt that. But as you know, sometimes friends can talk to you about their jobs and it just seems so glamorous and exciting. And so a friend of mine who was in broadcasting and journalism, she did. And she sold me on the thought of that. So I decided to transition into broadcasting. I worked my way up and ended up at CBS News in New York, anchoring 2 national news programs there. It was absolutely a fantastic opportunity. The only challenge is that when I open my eyes, I see that at the height of the recession, we're telling one story after another about people losing their homes and their jobs and their 401ks. And as everyone was witness to, it was heartbreaking. It was starting each morning with helplessness and hopelessness. So I thought that there had to be a better way. I decided to leave CBS News. I got tired of telling negative news stories. And more importantly, I wanted to understand how we could tell negative news in a way that was actually empowering to people and help move them forward in a positive direction. So I went to study at the University of Pennsylvania, and there I discovered positive psychology, the scientific study of happiness and human potential, and how that can actually, from a scientific standpoint, make us better leaders, better colleagues, better friends, and deepen the influence that we as individuals and organizations can have in this world. So from that point on, I've been sold, and that's been what I've been doing.
Well, let's talk about the science around positive psychology and also the definition of it. So many of our listeners, they're going to be hearing about positive psychology for the first time listening to you and I, or maybe it's the second time, and they're curious about how would you define positive psychology so that we can kind of have a framework in which to move forward as we talk.
Well, everyone knows about regular psychology, right? It's the study of disease and disorders and how to get people up to baseline. And positive psychology there was an official call for it back in the late 90s. The idea behind it is how can we, once we get people up to baseline, it can be in general or in specific domains of their life, how do we help them thrive? So it's a scientific study of happiness, of human potential, and the elements that go into getting people to thrive. Once we understand more about that, what happens is if we're really successful in one domain of our life, let's say our tennis game or our leadership skills or our communication skills, how can we leverage what we're already doing well and import it into other parts of our life that might not be working as well in order to improve results? What we see now is, from a scientific standpoint, that when we make small changes to our mindset and our habits, and in particular, I study communication because that's my background. When we make small changes to the way we communicate with people, we've seen that influences every single business and educational outcome we know how to track in terms of examples are productivity, profitability, engagement, creativity. Making those small shifts can influence those business outcomes, and we've now been able to track that progress at companies and organizations around the world.
So let's talk about the science around it. So if I come into work and let's say I'm a leader, most of our listeners are leaders in their organization, and we drag into work the issues that we just left home with, or maybe with what we just left the previous day of stress of projects and different things that we're trying to affect the outcome of. What's happening with that leader as they walk in and their effect on others from a science point of view in the brain? Like, what is happening that your message is that we can alter?
What I've looked at it from the perspective of is this idea that we're all broadcasters. So originally I thought that you have to be on TV or, as a news anchor, or maybe you're a professional athlete or a celebrity to have influence and power over other people. And the mindset that you have inside you is being radiated out to other people. It can either hold them back or propel them forward in their lives. But what I now see is that we all have this incredible power to influence other people. We are all broadcasters. So as leaders, when we come into the office and we are in a negative and stressed mindset, we're actually, through both our verbal and nonverbal channels, consciously or unconsciously, we're broadcasting that to the people around us. And we can therefore have a direct influence on their success results, on projects in the long term and sales. I mean, quantifiable changes. We've seen that a manager who was able to just make a small change to the way he communicated with his team in a 3-week span of time was able to increase their overall productivity by 31%. It's remarkable to have 31% more productive energy. It was incredible. So from a brain perspective, what's happening is that when we broadcast, I call it broadcasting happiness, but it's this idea of broadcasting a positive, optimistic, resilient mindset to the people around you, especially in the face of challenges. What we see is that can then in turn affect the brain chemistry, not only of yourself, but of the people around you. When we're stressed, the amygdala fires off. This is the fight or flight center of the brain. It drops in adrenaline and cortisol. I mean, we've all felt it, right? That stressed out response. Versus if we can see resources in our environment, see opportunities to make connections with other people, see the wins and successes we've experienced. When we stay in that optimistic mindset, we actually see the brain chemistry shift where dopamine gets dropped into the system, this amygdala stays quiet, and it floods the prefrontal cortex, which means that we have all the brain resources that we need to be in our high performance zone. The prefrontal cortex is that cognitive thinker, it's the part of our brain that we want at the helm. So anytime a leader can make that small shift from more stressed out place or anxious place or negative place, or even sometimes a neutral place to a positive place, everyone reaps the benefits.
So that dopamine hit that the leader can effect, it might be wrong with this, but that's a pretty addictive chemical, right? I mean, that's triggered not only with someone being positive or radiant in one's presence, but it's also triggered with cocaine as well. It's that addictive, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if in large amounts, yeah, I mean, cocaine would give you a huge boost of it, but that's definitely not what we're after. But even just small things like praising someone with a sincere and meaningful piece of praise, that can give them a small dopamine release, which then could in turn fuel their productive energy. We worked with an IT manager out in California. Gosh, he had a stressful job. He was in charge of dealing with bugs and other issues that would arise. He'd get this list printed out first thing in the morning, and he'd come to his team. He told me the story. His knuckles were literally white as he showed me how he would hold the list, and he would come to his team and talk about all the fires that they needed to put out. And he stressed out everybody. Then he heard about all this happiness research, and he said, okay, I'm going to make a change. I'll just try it out. So what he decided to experiment with is starting the meeting with 3 things he was grateful for. One about life in general, one about the team in general, and one thing he was grateful for about someone specific on the team. And they still got to all the fires they needed to put out. They called them business challenges instead. But what he said was that 45-second intervention at the top of the meeting transformed how people approached the challenges that they were facing. They felt higher levels of energy, they felt higher levels of team cohesiveness, and overall the day just flowed better because it was a positive start.
Yeah, it's a small win, but it has such a huge ripple in the team chemistry. Speaking of chemistry in the brain and being able to impact multiple people throughout the day, what a big win for everybody.
Absolutely.
Are you saying then that the brain can be like a muscle that we can actually shift from and learn these different skills? Or is that possible to actually malleably change the brain?
Absolutely. So what we find is that we are not just dealt a deck of cards and that's it, right? When it comes to especially what's at the heart of our research, which are the three greatest predictors of long-term success, they are malleable. So what we study is how does your mindset influence your overall levels of long-term success? And we've isolated these three greatest predictors. Your levels of work optimism. When challenges strike, what do you think about them? Do you expect good things to happen? Do you believe that your behavior matters? We also look at this idea of positive engagement, which is your relationship to stress. What's your story about stress? Do you view it as a challenge or a threat? And then the last one is social support provision. Originally, we were asking questions that gauged when you are at your organization, how supported are you by others and the company? When we flip the questions around and ask how much people were supporting their colleagues, their organization, if someone needed a listening ear or was falling behind on their work, how likely were they to step in? We found that was extremely more predictive overall of long-term job successes. So those three things taken together account for 75% of our long-term job successes. And if we focus on them, and in particular from a communication standpoint, we focus on strategies that can help us develop higher levels of those three things, they're malleable, that those changes will stick.
Michelle, can you repeat those three things again, just so that everybody can take notes, just the highlights?
Absolutely. So the three things are work optimism, and people who score in the top quartile of work optimists, they're significantly less likely to experience burnout and more likely to be highly engaged. The second one is positive engagement. It's your story about stress. And the third thing is support provision. How much do you support the people around you and your organization?
So it's not how much they're supporting you, but how much you're supporting them.
Yeah, you know what's amazing is that we developed this 30 question metric. It's actually freely available if someone wants to go to our website, broadcastinghappiness.com. It's called the success scale, and you can take it yourself. What we found is people who score for that third metric of support provision in the top quartile, the top 25%, those people are 40% more likely to receive a promotion over the next year than the people in the lowest quartile. So it shows us scientifically that what you give is what you get.
Well, I think it was interesting. I once worked for an entrepreneur that this was back in my 20s, and we had sold a project. And I remember going into him, and the customer had called in and had a complaint about something that I was just as a newbie, I was so stressed about it because I thought, oh my gosh, this customer's going to cancel everything on us. And he answered really interesting. He said, I love it when there's a problem from a customer. And I said, why would you like that? He goes, because it gives me an opportunity to show how great customer service we can give. And I thought, gosh, that was a really interesting way to interpret that.
Yeah, it's looking in it. I think that speaks so much to the second one, positive engagement, which is you're looking at stressful or challenging events as opportunities as opposed to cowering in fear from them. And that in turn, going back to the brain chemistry, changes our brain chemistry. If we're in that stress space, our body and brain follow suit, and we are just not in the best place to make the decisions or problem solve or connect with others. Whereas if we can switch the brain around, everything flows much better.
So how do we shift our brain? So we have a brain that is 50, 75,000 years. I don't know the exact number, but certainly a long time of a much more challenging environment, more physical, more threatening environment than we have today. So how do you shift your body if you have sort of this inherited history in your DNA so that an email or a threatening encounter in a meeting doesn't trigger this for you to spiral out the rest of the day? Like, how do you develop habits to build resilience and how you're communicating internally with yourself?
We've been able to distill quite a number of simple, easy, positive habits that can in turn influence business and educational outcomes dramatically. My favorite is the first one that I feature in my book called the Power Lead. The Power Lead was taken from my days in media. Normally with a television show, a newscast, the first story is chosen using the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads. For our own personal broadcasts, as we show up to work or we come home from a busy day and we see our spouse for the first time in 8 hours, we want to take the opposite approach. We want to lead with something positive and meaningful. So the power lead is by starting conversations, emails, phone calls, and any other interaction with someone by saying something positive and meaningful. Skip, I'm stressed. Oh, I'm so tired. Did you see the traffic outside? It's crazy, or whatever else that might be perceived as negative, stressful, or even neutral, and start with something positive. Hey, how are you? I'm doing great. I had breakfast with my son this morning and he was being so cute. Right? Something so simple, but that allows someone to have a window into you, your life, your brain, the way you think and see the world, which deepens social connection. The other thing is, by starting with something positive, you are taking the lead on that conversation. We are socialized to reciprocate mood, and most likely someone will say something positive right back to you. I don't advocate ignoring the negative, but the more we can reorient our brain to the positive and meaningful things going on in our world, the more we provide it fuel to be even more successful than it currently is right now.
So you're saying basically that you're going to experience the valleys. These are tools that you can use to build out of those valleys quicker and faster by being more consciously aware of your effect of this within your system and effect on others.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best example we saw of this is the work we did with Nationwide Brokerage Services, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Nationwide Insurance. They experienced, the same business challenges that many do, stressed out sales teams, and they wanted to hit their sales goals, and there was a lot of pressure there. They turned to this happiness research that we've been doing and decided to take a pervasive approach to rethinking basic business practices using it. One thing that I loved that they did was they started each day with this concept of a huddle. The huddle was the sales teams individually got together and they said, okay, so let's share recent successes that maybe other people on this team have not heard about from the past 24 hours. And then also, is there anyone here who needs a little extra support today? Can you tell us specifically how we can be there to support you? It was just such a simple move, but so incredibly transformative. And it's one of the changes that they made to their business practices that the president of the organization attributes to increasing sales revenues by more than 3 times. And it wasn't just some small 3-time increase. They went from $350 million to more than $1 billion in just a handful of years. So it shows us that rethinking even just those small business practices and showing up fully as leaders and employees, we can affect business outcomes from the top all the way to just individual happiness levels at work.
This really is a shift for the leader to think they have particular goals that they are trying to hit, but if they can step outside of themselves and see the we in it and actually see the impact they're having, they might want to impact the world, but they have to impact their coworkers around them. And this is all literally everything they're doing is triggering others in the support or the other way. And is it possible to have a neutral part of, like, is there ever a neutral interaction with anybody, or are you either below zero or above zero with your interaction with folks?
I mean, I think you can have neutral experiences with other people. Either it just is not impactful enough that it even records anything in their brain, or they just keep moving throughout their day. Or, yeah, I think you can have neutral experiences, but I think neutrality is a missed opportunity for positivity. And when we have those positive moments, that's when we create deeper levels of social connection and social capital. Leaders have to remember those small conversations that you have with someone in the hallway or in the break room, those do add up to higher levels of social capital for when challenges strike. So that when you get up in front of the room and you're telling them, hey, listen, stuff is going on with this company. It's stuff we've all got to deal with. We're going to do it together. They already know that you're a good guy. You care about them on a personal level. You're in it with them, that they trust you infinitely. And then the weight of your words are much stronger. The persona that we broadcast, it's 24/7. It doesn't stop. It's not just when we get up behind the podium or when we, send out a corporate communication. It's all the time.
And I also think your book is healthy too, from the angle that you're completely responsible. There is no victim in the message. It is, you are completely responsible for how you show up.
Yeah.
And you can't control every piece of external factors, but you can control you.
Absolutely. And I think, going back to the news for a second, the news tells us, it feeds us this lie that our behavior doesn't matter. If we see a barrage of negative news stories, we can sometimes start to think that our behavior does not matter in the face of challenge because we don't see those stories oftentimes being resolved or the fact that we can pitch in and help. But the problem becomes that oftentimes that thinking that we adopt from the news can seep into our business practice and the way we think about our work. So what I hope to do with this book and with because I was so inspired by the research is to present this research-based case that shows that actually there are many things within our control. We are incredibly powerful, and when we pay attention to these small shifts in the way we communicate and connect with other people, that's when we can create an incredible ripple effect.
That's very powerful. And it means that no one has to abdicate responsibility to the organization or to some other control center, that they actually do have the ability to impact their sphere of influence, which is a message of hope versus being beaten down.
Exactly.
So you have some really practical tips here. So if I'm a manager, if I'm a leader, if I'm a CEO and I have a huge to-do list, what is your message to how you use your methodology and your method of broadcasting happiness and positive psychology for a to-do list?
Well, to-do lists are very tricky, and yet if you rethink them, they can be fuel. So oftentimes people jot down all the list of things that they have to do and their brain gets overwhelmed and starts kind of freaking out, right? You're inducing a stress state. Versus if we can write down the things we need to do, but also include some of the things that we've already accomplished that morning that we might not have included on the list and check them off. I mean, we tell our brain, hey, we have an incredible set of wins here that gives our brain a little bit of extra fuel. I just wrote an article for Live Happy magazine, and it was tongue in cheek. It was funny, but it said something like, for the holidays, for Thanksgiving, write down that you're going to eat a whole pumpkin pie because you probably will, right? You're going to stock the wine fridge. It's going to happen. But that can hopefully help you get through all the other things that you put on your list that you need to do.
This is it's a simple message, but it's so darn powerful because I got sucked into this just this past week. I sat down to look at what my goals were the previous year for the business and in all areas of my life with family and everything. And I looked at this list and I had mapped it out. I tried to be very engage all parts of my brain in putting these goals together. And all my brain wanted to do was look at all the things I didn't accomplish.
Yeah.
That my brain wanted to look, and I had to sit back and literally force it like I was lifting like 300-pound bench press, which I can't do, but it was a heavy bench press, trying to move it to the positive. Man, this was so difficult. So what do you do in that situation?
Well, our brain is being very natural, the way it was developed originally. It's looking at all the potential threats in our environment, right? You want to fix all the problems. Our brain naturally wants to do that. What we're seeing now from positive psychology is actually, instead of in business trying to fix our flaws or get to every last thing on our to-do list, sometimes focusing on all the accomplishments and wins is actually much more fueling and helping us do the rest of the to-do list that we have for the next year. And by the way, as far as goal setting this can go for any time of the year, but I especially think about this in terms of setting New Year's resolutions. A lot of people like to write these huge long lists, as do I. But before we try to jump into 5 different things at once, the success rates jump dramatically when we can focus on one particular thing and drill it down to the smallest meaningful manageable goal possible to take that first step and get that first win.
That makes sense because I guess you're sort of like focusing on that first rung on the ladder, metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
You've got many, but you're building one success at a time.
Yes, exactly.
So as far as designing, many of my listeners are driving to work and they're kind of using this show as a fine-tuned radio station, right through their phone and listening to this as they drive. So what would you recommend to busy people that are commuting to positively impact their day and move it forward and accelerate their day forward in a different way?
It is so incredibly crucial to craft that early morning experience in a way that fuels you for the rest of the day. I just did some research with Ariana Huffington and researcher Sean Acor, and we found that exposure to 3 minutes of negative news in the morning can lead to a 27% higher likelihood of reporting your day as unhappy 6 to 8 hours later. So what that shows us is that when we get started in our day with something negative, that negative mood and mindset stays with us through the course of our day. Whereas if we can craft our commute to be inspirational, to provide us with tools, to be entertaining, to be positive and inspiring, that will stay with us. Like I said earlier, I don't advocate ignoring negative things going on in our world, but it's how we talk about it. So you can be informed on what's going on in the news as long as it's what I call transformative journalism. It's activating, engaging, and solutions focused. Activates in us the belief that our behavior matters. It's engaging us through discussion or calls to action, and it is focused less on the problem and more on the solution or potential solutions. So a podcast like this is perfect.
Right. Well, that's you can get a university education on wheels just with a 1 hour commute a day, and you add up the time commuting, and like you said, comedy and podcasts, and oh my goodness. And I'm going to link up in the show notes the resources for your book, Michelle. You have the Oprah video, which I found really very, very interesting, and I learned about the transformative communication. So I think it's really important because a lot of the listeners here in the IT and IT security area, it's a lot of bad news, but what are we doing about it? And I love that message again is much more. It's like you're leaning into the issue of the day, not necessarily backpedaling with your tail between your legs, and that's, I think, a very hopeful message.
Absolutely. I'm a true firm believer in the fact that, negative events, we can't control some of them and they will befall us, but it's what we do in response to them that makes the absolute difference.
So my final question, Michelle, is so if you had a billboard and you were in New York City, which you might just be in New York City, what would you have that billboard say if you could put anything you want on it and it could stay there for a year?
Oh my goodness, that is a fantastic question. Well, I would say what I say all the time, which is you are a broadcaster. The messages you choose to broadcast can either paralyze people or get them unstuck and believe that their behavior matters.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Well, I've had a blast with our conversation, Michelle. Is there any way that you would prefer people reach out to you learn more about you? Is it through your blog, through your book website, through LinkedIn, through Twitter? What are you using to kind of reach out to your audience and communicate to them?
You know what? We make it pretty easy. If you go to our website for the book, broadcastinghappiness.com, there is not only the success scale, the 30-question assessment I mentioned earlier, but also there's a contact form, and I receive those emails.
Excellent. Well, that's great. And I'm going to put all the show notes to our conversation on the blog website so that people can click through to that. Plus, it'll be on the podcast itself, so they'll get it right on the phone. They can just click right on the show image, and they'll be able to kind of link through to your site so they can further the conversation with you. But I really appreciate you for your time and sharing your wisdom with my audience, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you.
So this wraps up episode number 39 with Michelle Guilan. I hope you enjoyed the show with her. Next week, join me for episode number 40 with Rahul Kashyap. He's with Bromium. He's the CTO of Bromium, and Bromium is a virtualization security company, which is fascinating, and I've been following for a while. And I hope you enjoy my conversation with him. I think you'll find it excellent. Until then, see you next week.